Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all of the organizers of the African Dialogue Series 2026, and particularly the African Union, the African Development Bank, ISS Africa, UNESCO, UNICEF, and UNOSAA, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third webinar of this year's Africa Dialogue Series. My name is Diane Orjun. I am the Principal Rural Water Security Officer at the Africa Water Facility of the African Development Bank. I'm very pleased to be your moderator for today's event. Today is the third weekly webinar in this month's Africa Dialogue series, with each one covering a unique aspect of the overall series theme, which is water and sanitation for life, harnessing water resources for the Africa we want. The Africa Dialogue Series 2026 theme is inspired by this year's African Union theme, which recognizes water and sanitation as critical to achieving Agenda 2063's goals. 2 weeks ago, the first webinar focused on a strategic asset management approach to Africa's water resources, positioning water and sanitation as strategic assets that are pillars to socioeconomic and structural transformation on the continent. Last week's webinar was dedicated to water and sanitation as drivers of economic transformation and sustainable urbanization. Today's webinar will discuss the sub-theme Water and Sanitation for Peace, Energy, and Food Security. Detailed activities and products of the Africa Dialogue series are available on the ADS 2026 website, including the weekly youth stages. ADS 2026 will culminate in a high-level policy dialogue, which will be held in person at the UN headquarters in New York on Friday, May the 29th, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. in room CR4. With that, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Cristina Duarte, the United Nations Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, OSAA, to deliver her opening remarks. Ms. Duarte.
Thank you, Diana. Good morning from New York. Good afternoon, good evening. So allow me to deliver my opening remarks. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Webinar 3 of the Africa Dialogue Series 2026. My thanks to our partners, the African Development Bank, the African Union, the Institute for Security Studies, UNICEF and UNESCO for their engagements. As Diana mentioned in Webinar 1, we established that water is a sovereign asset to be governed, not a social service to be managed. In Webinar 2, we examine it as a driver of economic transformation. Today, we confront the hardest dimension of all. Ungoverned water does not simply slow development. It fuels conflict, displaces communities, and destroys the productive base of entire regions. Africa's water, land, energy, and use are a portfolio, a set of strategic assets that, managed together, constitute the most powerful development endowment on Earth. As everybody knows, Africa holds, and I said that in Webinar 1, allow me to remind, holds 90% of global renewable fresh water, around 65% of the world's uncultivated arable land, and over 600 gigawatts of untapped hydropower, 89% unused. The investment gap in Africa's water systems alone will reach by 2040 more than $1 trillion. But here is the political economy of ungoverned assets. When a state cannot govern its strategic resources, those resources do not sit idle. they become prizes for whoever can seize them. So we have seen this logic play out repeatedly. Some of the civil wars in Africa are an example of that. Assets the state could not protect and armed actors could exploit. For example, in the Central Sahel today, disputes over land and water access are more immediate drivers of recruitment and violence than ideology. Grievances over who controls productive resources constitute the political economy of insurgency. So water is not exempt from this logic. Across the continent, the expansion of extraction into remote, previous ungoverned territories displaces communities, contaminates water sources, and strips away agriculture livelihoods. In shared river basins, ungoverned use depletes transboundary systems whose costs no single state can absorb alone. Is the case of Lake Chad Basin, is the most visible warning. Since the 60s, the lake has contracted catastrophically, undermined the livelihoods of millions across Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. And of course, creating the conditions for armed groups, non-state actors, just to exploit. Allow me to say that this is not a coincidence. The geography, as you are going to say in a report that I hope that will be published in a couple of weeks, the geography of violence reflects the geography of deficit. And we need to be aware of this very delicate relationship. In 21, 84% of fatalities from violent events in the Sahel occur in areas where more than 75% of the population depend on agriculture, so land, farming, and at least 30% lack access to an improved water source. This is a coincidence? No. So water insecurity and violent conflict are not parallel crises. They are the same crisis. They are the same crisis. This is precisely why a strategic asset management approach that we have been advocating since day one of the Africa Dialogue series is not a technical preference, is not a technical option. It is, from a peace and security, is a sort of imperative. If we do not adopt a strategic asset management towards water, for example, it will be difficult to deliver durable peace and security. So in water, it means moving from a very siloed, fragmenting, and competitive exploited approach to more integrated transboundary flows management that approaches basins as a naturally integrate space. So it means shifting from identifying ad hoc infrastructures, but to manage water more as an asset in an integrated way. We know that 90% of Africa's surface water crosses at least one international border. So water is, by definition, by default, maybe the natural resources that requires for Africa to move quickly from a regional integration standpoint. So those systems or those shared systems need to be governed in a more integrated and cooperative way. So the outcomes of this conversation, I hope, will feed directly into the call to action that our high-level policy dialogue on 20th of May will organize. And I hope into Africa's voice at the UN Water Conference later this year, because as you know, we have a UN Water Conference later this year. So Africa's water is its future. The choice is between governing it as a sovereign asset or watching it become a source of conflict and extraction. I'm sure that today in this webinar we will choose governance, I'm sure. Thank you. Back to you, Diana.
Thank you, USG Duarte, for setting the stage for today's webinar with some very interesting points and facts. Today, we are also joined by Mr. Abu Amani, who is the Assistant Director General for Sciences, Secretary, Intergovernmental Hydrological Program of UNESCO. Mr. Armani, the floor is yours to deliver your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Diana. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues, friends, good afternoon or good morning or good evening from wherever you are connected. It's given me a pleasure to join you on behalf of UNESCO, and allow me on this onset to really thank the organizers of this Africa Dialogue series, which, as highlighted, is aligned to the African Union team of the year. We all know the team. I don't want to repeat it. But as we highlighted, our goal of today, our focus is on water and sanitation for peace, energy, and food security. And this is really capture very well the essence of the Agenda 2063. It highlights how water is not only a basic human need, but a strategic asset that underpins stability, economic development, and the resilience across the continent. Water is central to food systems through irrigation, to energy through hydropower, and to peace through cooperation of shared resources. Her Excellencies has already highlighted the importance of shared water within African countries. At the same time, inadequate access to water and sanitation can exacerbate inequality and contribute to fragility. Yet, important challenges remain. Progress in access to water, safely managed water resources is still insufficient, while climate change is intensifying water stress, variability, and risk. This is why integrated approaches are fundamental. The water, energy, food ecosystem nexus provide a powerful framework to ensure that water investment simultaneously advance peace, energy security, and food system transformation. In this context, UNESCO, through its Intergovernmental Hydrological Program, is in charge of providing the dedicated water sciences, knowledge, and capacity to support countries worldwide, but particularly also African countries. Over the 50 years of the program advances science-based decision making on groundwater governance, on transboundary water cooperation, on climate risk-informed planning and management, and hydrological data systems and early warming mechanism. Across Africa, UNESCO is already contributing to practical solutions and scalable solutions aligned with today's focus, supporting transboundary water cooperation for peace. I want really to stress on the critical importance of that word peace for UNESCO. As you know, UNESCO was established after the Second World War, and within the constitution of UNESCO, the aim of UNESCO is to change the mind of men and women to have peace as ultimate goal. So peace for us is really important. So water is at the core of supporting achieving peace in Africa based because of the transboundary nature of the resources. Also, we have been advancing groundwater management for water security and resilience and strengthening early warming systems that safeguard lives, livelihoods, energy system, and agriculture. Our global water family, because this our program, I said, we celebrated 50 years last year. So the program was able to put in place a comprehensive, what we call UNESCO water family, comprising 29 UNESCO's water centers in the world, 93 UNESCO chairs in the world, and more than 170 national archive committees. Among those members, we have 11 based in Africa, chairs and centers which we can leverage to support African countries advancing the knowledge of hydrological system for evidence-based decision-making, and particularly in transboundary setting. Building capacity is essential for us because without well-skilled water professionals capable of supporting government, putting appropriate policies, we cannot achieve peaceful management of the water resources. Looking ahead, this dialogue contributes to a broader pathway of engagement in 26, including Luanda Biennial, 4th edition Pan-African Forum for the Culture of Peace and Nonviolence, which will focus on strengthening water governance in Africa as a tool for conflict prevention, mediation, and resolution, as well as it was already highlighted by Her Excellency, the 2026 United Nations Water Conference. Let me conclude with 4 key messages. First, water must be managed as a strategic asset, central to delivering peace, energy security, and sustainable food systems. Second, investment in science, data, and innovation is essential. Strengthening hydrological knowledge, data systems, and climate information services is critical for informed decision-making and long-term planning. Third, capacity building and water education must be at the core of our efforts. Empowering institutions, professionals, youth, and communities with the skill and knowledge needed to manage water sustainability is fundamental to achieving lasting impact. In this regard, UNESCO's art program will continue to play a unique role in advancing water education, scientific cooperation, and knowledge sharing across Africa. And fourth, cooperation across sectors and across borders is paramount. There is no other way moving forward to transform water into a source of shared prosperity and stability. UNESCO stands ready to continue working hand in hand with the African Union, member states, and partners to advance a water secure and resilient Africa where water and sanitation serve as foundations for peace, energy, and food security. Thank you. Back to you, Diana.
Thank you, Mr. Amani, for the opening remarks that shed further light on today's theme. Before we continue, I would just like to remind our speakers if they could stay within the 3 to 5 minute limit so we can get to everyone and hear everyone's interventions. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Aidan Cronin, who is the Senior Advisor for WASH. He will be speaking on behalf of Mr. Everest Kouassi Comlin, who is the Global WASH Director for UNICEF. Mr. Cronin, please go ahead with your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, and hope you can hear me fine. I'm on my colleague Anu's computer. Good morning, everyone.
We can hear you.
Fantastic. And it's an enormous pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm really happy to be able to share some remarks as requested this morning. So when we speak about water and sanitation, of course, we're not only speaking about basic services, we're speaking about human capital, resilience, economic development, climate adaptation, peace, and dignity. So increasingly, we understand that WASH sits at the center of the water, energy, food, peace nexus. Water underpins agriculture and food systems, as colleagues have already mentioned. It supports energy production and economic activity and contributes to health, nutrition, education, etc. So when managed equitably and sustainably, it really can, of course, strengthen resilience and social cohesion. And we know the opposite is also true. So at the same time, climate shocks, population growth, urbanization, fragility are placing increasing pressure on water systems across Africa. We know that this is hitting children the hardest, and today millions of children across the continent lack access to safe water and sanitation. Unsafe water, of course, as we all know, contributes to a multitude of problems around disease, undernutrition, stunting, school absenteeism, and vulnerability during climate shocks and displacements. And this is exacerbated in fragile contexts. So we also know that water and sanitation present opportunities, enormous opportunities. And Africa is home to one of the world's youngest populations. By 2063, we know there'll be nearly 1 billion children on the continent, and investments in WASH today will make significant impacts on their future, their ability to be leaders, innovators, and contributing to prosperous societies. So in the first 2 days of the Africa Dialogue series, you'd have already heard inspiring examples across the continent. We heard from Madagascar, where sanitation systems are being reimagined through circular economy approaches. We will hear today also from Mali about the linkages between water, energy, resilience, and peace building in practice. These examples remind us that water is not only a development challenge, but it's also an opportunity. So as UNICEF, we're working to support governments and communities on strengthening climate resilience of systems, improving water and sanitation in schools and healthcare facilities, connecting WASH with health, nutrition, and climate action, and strengthening governance and financing systems. So we hope all of these will support communities affected by fragility and displacement to up their resilience. So we want that, that WASH is part of investing in young people, not only as beneficiaries, but shaping Africa's future. And young people are contributing very actively now, today, on innovation, climate action, entrepreneurship, and community solutions. And we've heard some of these examples, and we want that this collaboration will continue, collaboration across governments, AU, institutions, development banks, communities, private sector, and young people themselves as we move towards Agenda 2063. We see that increasingly WASH is not only a social benefit, but a strategic investment in resilience, human capital, and peace, as my colleague just mentioned in the talk previous to this. So to conclude, while investing in systems, partnership, and youth leadership around WASH, we can unlock transformative progress for children and communities across Africa. And I'm really excited by the panelists that will come, who will share their insights in this. Thank you, Diane, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cronin, for these very insightful remarks. It is my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Desigan Nadu, who is a Senior Research Associate for the Institute for Security Studies in Africa, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Nadu, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Good day, Excellencies and esteemed colleagues. It is a pleasure for me personally and a pleasure for the ISS to have been a partner in this really enormous effort as we try to turn an important corner. we have a very wide range of panelists to cover the energy issues and the food security issues. So I'm going to follow Christina's line and give some depth to the water, peace, and security matters. I think an important starting point is for us to acknowledge that water and conflict are very, very old friends. In fact, so much so, as one of the first things human beings did when they started getting together, there was a recognition that if we don't deal with the issues of conflict, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And in fact, water and conflict has been the driver around developing many of our legal regimes and our governance systems. And it's quite astounding that these tens of thousands of years later, all we have actually done is become much more sophisticated about the way we expand the conflict. And it genuinely is a time to pull it back. Now, Africa has water as a hotspot. I really liked that idea of the overlaying geographies because that is absolutely true. And if you put secondary geographies on it, it becomes even more stark. Now, the Pacific Institute organizes a categorization of how water plays out in conflict, and there are three categories. The one category, the one we speak about a lot, or used to, without talking about the other two, is water as a casualty of conflict, casualty of war, and we know this story really well. The one that's coming into the landscape more and more and more is the acknowledgement that water is in fact a cause for conflict. And the one we talk least about, which is unbelievable, is the weaponization of water. And Africa has this rife. It is much worse in some other parts of the world. We can acknowledge that, but Africa is deep within this. So the Pacific Institute's water conflict chronology says that between 2020 and now, we have had 328 water conflicts on the continent of Africa, 70 in North Africa, and 258 in sub-Saharan Africa. This is an enormous number by any count. And this recognition evolved into the development of the African Water Vision and the need for water, peace, and security to be a key part of the enabling environment to get anywhere near the aspirations of Agenda 2063, as we all want. And for this very reason, the diplomacy, peace, and security pillar is one of the four pillars of the African Water Vision. And in particular, it wants to engage the issues in the water domain of institutions and capacities to ensure cooperative water governance across the continent. Now, transboundary water is a primary focus, absolutely, but intra-national conflicts are also quite rife. So that cooperative governance concept has to go through all of those layers in a kind of scaffolding, from international to national, from national to subnational, subnational to very local. And this is absolutely key. The issue around ensuring a recognition of water as a strategic asset for development, absolutely. But water should also be seen, water and sanitation should also be seen as strategic assets for peace and security as well. And while a lot of action is needed in the water sector, we also need for water to become one of the key discussion points and part of the strategy that encompasses the African security architecture as a whole. Because if we do not manage to do this, we are not going to get anywhere close in the long term to Agenda 2063. And in the short term, the SDGs are going to be a far, far target to find. Thank you very much. And I too am looking forward to a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naidu. And I as well am looking forward to a wonderful panel session. Your opening remarks were very pertinent and interesting. So this concludes our opening segment. We will continue on to the panel discussion, but before we move to the discussion with the distinguished panel, we have a few housekeeping issues to cover. First, to start, we will have a first round of interventions of about 3 to 4 minutes per panelist. Panelists, please try to stay within the 3 to 4 minute time frame. We will then open the discussion to involve the audience so that we can collectively identify concrete ways and means for short and long-term solutions amongst ourselves. We invite the audience questions for our panelists, and please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A or the chat box. And if your question is for a particular panelist, please indicate this as well. So to continue, we are joined today by a distinguished panel of experts who will share their action-oriented perspectives with us. As we do with each week's webinar, we will use the insights that we gather today in a call to action that will be culminated during the high-level policy dialogues of the ADS 2026, which is scheduled to take place on the 29th of May. So to keep the conversation moving smoothly, I will not talk too much and I will not make long introductions. The bios of our speakers are included in the chat, and these will also be uploaded on the dedicated event website. The policy brief on the theme of the discussion today will also be included in the chat. So without further ado, I would like to start our conversation with Dr. Henry Roman, the regional representative for Southern Africa for the International Water Management Institute. Dr. Roman, your question is, we have a collective impending water and food security crisis in Africa. What are the innovative water solutions that CIGAR is working on that can mitigate the impact on food systems? Dr. Roman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to everybody. I'll stand on the protocols expressed by the speakers before me. So to start with, I think the framing of the question is exactly right. Africa is facing not just a water crisis or a food crisis, but a systemic interconnected crisis across water, energy, food, as well as ecosystems. And this is, in my view, also precisely why the Africa Dialogue Series 2026 is so important. It recognizes that water is not simply a social service. It is a strategic asset that underpins economic transformation, food systems, energy production, climate resilience, and peace, as so many of the speakers have said. So at CGIAR and at IMI, our work is fully aligned with the vision and with a continent shift toward managing water through a water, energy, food ecosystems approach, or WEFI Nexus approach. So I'm going to highlight 4 key areas where we are advancing innovative nexus-based water solutions for Africa. So the first is redesigning food systems to reduce systemic vulnerability. So one of the core insights that we've got from a nexus perspective is that African agriculture is highly exposed to external shocks, particularly fertilizer, fuel, and rainfall variability. And we're seeing that even with the current conflict that's happening in the world, how the impacts are being felt on the continent. And CGIAR is working to advance circular nutrient solutions, including wastewater reuse, organic nutrient recovery, alongside climate smart soil and water management. So these approaches should lead to a reduction of dependence on fragile global supply chains and strengthen resilience across the food system. Secondly, scaling energy smart irrigation to unlock water access. So across the continent, water access is often constrained not by availability, but by energy. And CGIAR and IMI are scaling solar-powered irrigation systems and energy-efficient pumping tech to assist in that. So this then expands your irrigation and reduces your exposure to fossil fuel price shocks and supports low-carbon, climate-resilient agriculture. Then investing in climate resilient, nature-based water systems. So rather than an over-reliance on large infrastructure, we can advance decentralized water storage, landscape-based water management, and nature-based solutions. And these approaches should then enhance water availability whilst restoring the ecosystem and reducing risks from droughts and floods, which we're getting increasing cycles of on the continent as well. Then strengthening data and governance and transboundary cooperation, another topic mentioned quite extensively. So innovation is therefore also institutional. And there we're looking at supporting digital water and climate information, decision support tools, and integrated planning approaches to help manage the trade-offs that arise across the sectors. So this then supports the strategic asset management of water and strengthens cooperation across Africa's shared basins. For an example, in SADC, we've got 15 basins shared between the countries. So to close, Africa's challenge in water is not only about scarcity, it's about the system, the design, the governance, and resilience. And by applying WEFI-Nexus solutions, Africa can then build the food systems that are less dependent on external shocks, more resource efficient, and more inclusive. And if we get this right, water will become a catalyst for resilient food systems, economic transformation, and long-term stability across the continent. I thank you, and back to you, Diane.
Thank you, Dr. Roman. Our next panelist is Dr. Mamadou Babassi, who is the Director of the Water Department at the Observatoire du Sahara et du Sahel, the OSS. Your question, Dr. Babassi, is groundwater is increasingly recognized as essential for water security, climate resilience, and livelihoods across many regions, particularly in arid and semi-arid areas. From the perspective of the Sahara and Sahel Observatory, how important is it today to strengthen transboundary cooperation on shared aquifers? And what do you see as the main priorities to better integrate groundwater into regional water security strategies? Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Diana. Thank you very much for the question. Very pleased to be part of this webinar in this very crucial subject for Africa. So, as you know, to just respond to this question, groundwater is becoming one of the most strategic resources for Africa's future, especially in arid and semi-arid regions such as the Sahara and the Sahel, where climate change and recurrent drought and growing water demand are increasingly pressure on water resources. And from the perspective of the Saharan Sahel Observatory, strengthening transboundary cooperation on shared aquifers is not only a technical or environmental issue, it's fundamentally a matter of water security, climate resilience, regional stability, and also sustainable development. And in many Africa's countries, groundwater is the main and sometimes the only reliable resource of fresh water for drinking water, for agriculture, livestock, and ecosystem. At the same time, most major aquifers are transboundary. And groundwater does not follow, as you know, political borders, which means that sustainable management requires cooperation, shared knowledge, and common groundwater approach. At OSS, our experience in the implementation of some transboundary aquifers, such as the Northwestern Sahara Aquifer System, the Ulumenden, this one is in North Africa, the Ulumenden Aquifer System, or Ulumenden also Taoudini-Tanizulf Aquifer System in Western Africa. We are now implementing the Senegalo-Mauritanian Aquifer System in West Africa also. And this has shown that groundwater cooperation can become a powerful platform for dialogue, trust building, and regional integration. One key lessons we want to share here is that shared aquifer management starts with shared knowledge. We cannot manage what we don't know. And countries cooperate more effectively when they have access to harmonized data. We put in place databases, and where they are harmonized with common assessments and jointly development monitoring tools, then cooperation becomes better. Then strengthening groundwater information systems, monitoring networks, and data sharing mechanisms should therefore be a top priority in this framework. So I want to just in this regard to highlight four main priorities. The first is improving groundwater monitoring and knowledge system. In many Africa regions, groundwater remains poorly monitored. We don't monitor usually, we don't measure, and then insufficiently understood. We need stronger hydrogeological database, observation networks, Earth observation application, and early warning system. New technology, including satellite monitoring and artificial intelligence, offers major opportunities to improve forecasting and decision making. The second one is integrating groundwater more fully into climate adaptation and resilience policies. As you know, at national level, sometimes it is missing. And then groundwater acts as a natural buffer during drought and climate shocks, yet it is still insufficiently prioritized in many adaptation strategies in some countries. Third, strengthening transboundary governance and regional cooperation mechanisms. Here we have just shown that shared aquifer requires shared institution, dialogue platform, and cooperation framework that can support both sustainable management and preventive diplomacy. And the first one is that promoting integrating approach through the water energy food ecosystem nexus. In this framework, groundwater connects all these sectors, and sustainable water security cannot be achieved through fragmented sectoral approach. We need to integrate all these thematic on these sectors. And then finally, Africa already has strong regional experiences and institutions that can be scaled up. That is needed now is stronger political commitment, increased investment, and closer cooperation between water, climate, agriculture, and peace-building actors. And then just to finish, allow me to conclude with a simple message, and the message is that shared aquifer required shared responsibility, shared knowledge, and shared solutions. And thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Babesi. Our next panelist is Dr. Betty Chinyamanyamu, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Smallholder Farmers Association of Mali. The question for Dr. Chinyamanyamu is, from the perspective of smallholder farmers, why should water and sanitation be treated as strategic economic assets rather than simply social services? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane, and all distinguished participants in this webinar. Just to say that I'm from the National Smallholder Farmers Association of Malawi and not Mali. Small difference there. And I'd like to start with, for smallholder farmers, water is not just a basic need. It is a productive asset that directly determines food security, incomes, resilience, as well as national economic growth. In Malawi, there's a common saying that water is life, and I'm sure it is a saying in other countries as well. But particularly in a country like Malawi, where agriculture employs the majority of the population and contributes significantly to GDP, unreliable water systems translate into low productivity, crop failure, food inflation, as well as poverty. So water is definitely an economic asset, and we need to shift from reactive approaches to long-term thinking, long-term investment thinking about it. This means investing in irrigation systems, watershed management, climate-smart agriculture, rural water infrastructure, and water-efficient technologies, amongst others, and others that build the resilience of smallholder farmers. It also means recognizing that every investment in water has multiplier effects across agriculture, energy, nutrition, health, and industrialization. For example, in Malawi and many other African countries, access to irrigation allows farmers to move from subsistence farming to commercial production, supports agro-processing industries, and creates jobs across value chains. In Malawi, we have seen that farmers with reliable water access are better able to diversify their crops, withstand droughts, as well as participate in export markets. Especially in light of climate change, expanding small-scale and community irrigation systems significantly improves productivity and reduces vulnerability to erratic rainfall. In Malawi, you should also mention that 80 to 90% of our electricity generation comes from hydropower, and much of it generated along the Shire River. And at the same time, it is the same river that supports irrigation schemes. It is where a lot of agriculture production takes place. Fisheries thrive in the same areas and supports livelihoods of millions that depend on the Shire River. So when drought reduces water levels in the Shire River, we simultaneously experience reduced electricity generation and load shedding, lower irrigation capacity, reduced agricultural productivity, pressure on fisheries and ecosystems, slower industrial activities, and the list goes on. So just one climate shock affects food production, energy supply, household incomes, economic growth, all at once. So the water energy ecosystem nexus is not just a theory. It is Africa's development. It is the reality of Africa's development. Food security cannot exist without water security, just as energy generation, industrial growth, public health, and environmental sustainability all depend on how well we manage our water resources. When water systems fail, crops fail, energy production declines, ecosystems deteriorate, livelihoods are lost, and economic instability rises. But when the same water is managed strategically, we see that it becomes a catalyst for agricultural transformation, climate resilience, industrialization, inclusive economic growth in Malawi and across the country. So in summary, and as I conclude, I really would want to buttress the point that this is more than a theory. This is the reality of many countries in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the correction. I'm really sorry about that. Before I introduce the next panelist, I just want to remind the audience again to please submit your questions for our terrific panelists who have spoken and for those to come, including their names if you are directing it to a particular panelist. You can also put your comments in the chat. And I remind again our speakers to keep within 3 to 4 minutes, but you've all done very well, so thank you for that. Now for the next panelist. The next panelist is Mr. Eric Oyari from the Africa Freshwater Lead. He's the Africa Freshwater Lead from the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And the question we ask is, which strategic interventions or investments could accelerate progress in improving water and sanitation management for the environment and food security? Go ahead, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thank you so much, Madam Diane, for having me, and hello to all the participants and all the colleagues in the panel. I want also to ride on the protocols that have been established, and thank you for the question. To start off, I just wanted to start by painting a picture in terms of the reality of the situation that we are facing within that sector of water, sanitation management for environment and food security. Currently, we realize that only about 20% of rural Africans have access to safely managed drinking water. About 30% of those have safe sanitation. Currently, Africa is losing about 5 to 14% of GDP every year to water insecurity alone. And 35% of our wetlands have been lost since 1970. Following that, we are also seeing that 70% of Africa's freshwater goes to irrigation, yet only 6% of the arable land in the continent is actually irrigated. That gap alone is costing us about 3 to 5 billion US dollars annually in terms of flood and drought losses alone. 3 in 4 jobs globally depend on water. And therefore, with this kind of a picture, we are realizing and we know that water security actually is food security. And so to that question, what kind of interventions do we want to propose so that the world considers and join us in a collective action as a community of practice to really restore and bring back water systems so that we can address sanitation management and also be able to ensure we are addressing environment, issues around climate change, but also address food security. So number one thing that in our perspective we think needs to change is the restoration of nature. So we need to build a continuum of restoration actions that can bring back nature. And why should this happen? We are realizing that degraded watersheds and drying wetlands are the real engine behind Africa's food shocks. Restoring them is cheaper than building dams and canals, yet they remain the most unfunded and underfunded solutions on the table. Secondly, environmental flows, which actually is measuring the minimum amount of water in terms of volumes that we keep in our rivers, play a very important role in protecting downstream farms, wetland fisheries, and seasonal agriculture. Fewer than 40% of Africa's rivers basins legally have regulatory and protection frameworks that impact on these environmental flows. This must change. Secondly, we need to invest and implement future-proof water governance across our borders, and other speakers, especially the openers, have alluded to this. 90% of Africa's surface water crosses national borders across our 63 river basins. No country can solve this challenge alone. We need integrated water resource management frameworks, transboundary basin treaties, and water, energy, food, and ecosystem nexus that must be planned together and in a coordinated manner, not in silos. And we need data because without real-time hydrological monitoring, water allocation is political, not evidence-based, and other speakers have alluded to this. Farmers and ecosystems always lose that fight. And finally, as an intervention, we want to propose and continue the debate sector must move together. Public capital must be used to de-risk nature-based solutions so that private finance can follow. I thank you, Madam Moderator. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Oyari. That was very interesting. Our next panelist is Dr. Bassem Sadelawi, who is the Chief for WASH in Mali, and I think I got that right this time, for the United Nations Children's Fund. So, Mr. Sadelawi, the question is, based on your experience in the Sahel, can you identify the critical areas in which African member states should invest to prevent interstate conflict and geopolitical risks in the context of the water, sanitation, and peace nexus? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mrs. Arjun. So based on my experience in Mali and across the Sahel, I want to share 4 critical areas where African member states can invest to prevent interstate conflict and manage geopolitical risk through water, sanitation, and peace nexus. And I want to ground each one in what we are actually seeing on the ground in Mali, and where UNICEF and partners also are adding real value to help governments make sound, scalable investments. So the first one is the climate resilient water infrastructure. In Mali, for example, we are no longer building water points the way we did 10 years ago. Through UNICEF-supported programs, we are deploying solar-powered boreholes, protected storage and distribution networks designed to survive both prolonged droughts and sudden flooding. We are also working with government of Japan on solar-powered system for vulnerable communities, integrating artificial intelligence, remote technology with local management tools. So UNICEF added value here, for example, is concrete. We provide technical standards, cost benchmarking, and life cycle analysis that help ministries make informed investment choices, choosing the right technology at the right scale, in the right location, with maintenance and renewal built in from day one. Why does this matter for peace? Because in the Sahel, a borehole that fails in a pastoralist corridor is not just a service failure. It becomes a flashpoint between farmers and herders, between host communities and the displaced. Every reliable water point is quite literally a conflict prevented. And in a country currently facing a severe fuel crisis and a region grappling with deepening energy crisis, solar is no longer a technology choice. It has become a preparedness strategy, ensuring that water continues to flow when fuel supplies are disrupted, when the grid fails, and when communities are most vulnerable. So the second one is the local water governance. Most infra-state tensions over water are not resolved in capitals. They are resolved or ignited at the community level. UNICEF is supporting community-based water management committees that bring farmers, pastoralists, women, and youth around the same table with real authority and real resources. Beyond setting up these committees, we equip governments with the tools to scale them, training curricula, performance monitoring frameworks, digital platforms. For example, the MAP Action innovative dashboard in Mali, which gives technical services real-time visibility on the functionality of water points via community reporting. So this is what allows the government to move from project-by-project delivery to a national system-wide investment strategy. The third one is the transboundary cooperation. As mentioned so many times during this webinar, 90% of Africa's surface water is crossing borders. Basin organizations such as the OMVS, the Niger Basin Authority, and the Lake Chad Basin Commission are peace infrastructure. In Mali, for example, we sit at the heart of the Niger Basin. And we know that what happens upstream in Guinea or downstream in Niger directly shapes our food security, our energy options, and our stability. So UNICEF added value here at the level of the evidence. And for example, joint vulnerability assessment, child-centered climate risk mapping across borders, and support governments in developing bankable regional investment programs that attract climate finance and blended capital. For example, the Mali-Mauritania-Senegal cross-border program, supported now by the Peace Building Fund, is a living example. Shared investment in water and sanitation are turning a fragile border zone into a corridor of cooperation and trust. And lastly, the integration of water risk into our peace and security architecture. Hydrological stress, displacement, and conflict signals must be read together, not in silence. The African peace and security architecture should treat water as a strategic security priority. UNICEF can support the evidence base. We are present in the communities. We track the wash access, child displacement, nutrition, and disease outbreaks. And this data, properly integrated into continental early warning systems, can transform how Africa anticipates and prevents water-driven crises. We are also helping governments build the case for investment, translating field data into the policy briefs, costed plans, concept notes that ministry need to engage with the African Development Bank, for example, and bilateral partners. Let me close with a reflection from the field. In Mali today, a child born in a rural community faces compounded risks, climate shocks, displacement, insecurity, and fragile services, all converging on the same household. What UNICEF brings is not just infrastructure or supplies. It is the discipline to plan for the long term in the context that often demand only emergency response. It's the technical, financial, analytical support that helps governments turn good intentions into bankable, scalable investments. It's the partnership with government to embed strategic asset management into national systems. And it's the conviction that water and sanitation are not humanitarian afterthoughts. They are the foundation of every other peace and development outcome we seek. Every franc or dollar invested in these 4 areas is a franc we do not spend on humanitarian response or stabilization or on rebuilding what conflict destroys. The African Water Vision 2063 gave us the ambition. UNICEF, the UN system in general, and our partners stand ready to support the African member states in turning that ambition into reality, village by village, basin by basin, and country by country. Thank you so much. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadalawi. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our final panelist, Mr. Victor Ochen, who is the founder and executive director of the African Youth Initiative Network. The question is, what are the long-term human consequences of growing up in refugee camps without reliable access to clean water, safe sanitation, and healthy living conditions? And what responsibility do policymakers and global leaders have to ensure that no displaced person is left behind in Africa's development journey? Please go ahead, Mr. Ochen.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan. And hello, everybody. Just to follow the protocols as already alluded. Greetings from Lira in northern Uganda. And as it's been discussed very clearly, water is invariably among the first and, if not severely, most affected resources during both natural and man-made disasters. Can be due to war, floods, drought, and many, many other aspects. But most importantly, as we already know, we wouldn't even say there's basically one proven model that works for all, because different communities have got different needs, but also different circumstances. Humanitarian emergencies requires different approaches. Growing up in northern Uganda and also continuing to work in the most affected communities of the north and in other parts of the continent, we have witnessed how much society gets so defeated. And somebody mentioned earlier on that water security is directly linked to food security and is directly linked to political security. An insecure environment emanates mainly from the struggle of the natural resources. Especially right now, what we are seeing commonly around here is the struggle for water and tension between the users and then the government that is in control as well, and also between the fighting communities who want to use the resources. But in northern Uganda, and also from the refugee and humanitarian settings, from what we have seen, there's been challenges in collective advocacy, gaps in a way. You find different people who doesn't know They are not connected, they're not involved, they're not in a way, the environment is so linked from water crisis and food crisis. There is need to link between water crisis and food crisis and the livelihood linkages and need for diversification in a way that when authority comes in terms of providing oversight support, they're also treating it as a package that is so intertwined. You can't address the water crisis alone without tackling the food security or food crisis. From northern Uganda, our experience, and when we did a stock take of our 20 years of work, we were wondering, 20 years we have done the work in communities affected by war, but where are those people that we have supported today? We realized that majority of these people have been through trauma of war or war trauma, but now in the post-conflict setting, they are going through economic trauma. Economic trauma due to struggle over usable lands or usable or resources, and it has made it very difficult for many people to recover. We have seen majority of people who have supported for so many years have relapsed into abject poverty. We are talking about a community where we are working in right now, a society where there are 4 boreholes. There are 4 boreholes. It's a community of about 50,000 people, and it's also a community where there are 78 churches and 4 primary schools. 78 churches, 4 primary schools, and 4 boreholes for 50,000 people. This is the kind, it can tell you this is where data doesn't lie. It tells you how much society have to grapple with the devastating effects of water. So when we are looking at from all these years we have seen, the lessons learned has been there's need to create an enabling environment where people understand the link between water crisis and education, the water crisis and household challenges. And also, we have also got to understand the importance of letting the community to understand the risk and better management processes and creating a pathway for population to be part of it. In a way, development effort could also work well, but it has to be aligned within whatever we are underlining. And lastly, because many people have already spoken about what I had also prepared, I think it's important to pay attention in a humanitarian context, the economic inability for many people to afford even the very basic, small, clean water management, water purification processes. Because what we see right now, find communities are battling with the devastating effects of climate change, but also they are battling with pollution of water they drink, and yet they have no power to stop anything. So sometimes you find there's a lot of fight going on because people are fighting over the small, clean, fresh water because there's already a lot of mismanagement. And then another issue is the aspect of limited skills and aspects of monitoring. Who monitors the water? Must we have water quality be monitored when there's already disasters, or we should work in a way that brings innovatively work in a way that brings an upfront monitoring capability. And of course, lastly, the world is advancing technologically, but there is technological incompatibility with the traditional knowledges. We need to find a way, how do we integrate our advanced technology in a way that and make it operational at a grassroots level? Because we have seen these infrastructure gaps has remained the biggest challenges at the grassroots level, especially in the humanitarian setting, and it has a direct policy constraint, and also the question of contamination become political in a way. So in a way, livelihood comes down to the basic and the most important reason. And that's why we said, if we seek sustainable peace, it has to be rooted into economic independence. And economic independence is impossible without water security. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ochen. That brings us to the end of our panel session. We have some questions that have come through from the audience. So our colleagues have been following the Q&A in the chat, and I would like to share some of the questions to the panelists. So the first question we have is for Betty. Build Back Better is the key to improved climate resilience. Has this been the Malawian experience after Cyclone Freddy? And what are the lessons?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So Cyclone Freddy was actually a painful reminder that climate resilience is no longer optional. It is a national survival and a development imperative. And certainly the idea of build back better is absolutely the right direction. But in Malawi, I can say that experience has been, it's still work in progress, maybe I should say. There have been some positive lessons that were learned and improvements that perhaps have been implemented since Cyclone Freddy. So, first of all, I must say that we saw a stronger recognition of the importance of a resilient infrastructure. So, in terms of building back, it was not just building back infrastructure that was there before, but building back more climate resilient infrastructure. We also saw another positive thing, that there was good coordination between government and development partners in terms of the response. And that the response did not just focus on short-term interventions, immediate measures, but also medium to long-term measures, which some of which is still ongoing at the moment. But there was also greater discussion around early warning systems, around climate adaptation and disaster preparedness. So all those, I think there were some positive things that came out from Cyclone Freddy. But at the same time, I think on the other hand, we saw that things were worsened because of primarily two things. One, many communities were already living in vulnerability. And so they, because of poverty, they had poor housing, there was environmental degradation, they depended on rain-fed agriculture. So when Cyclone Freddy hit, entire livelihoods collapsed. So I think that was a bitter lesson that was learned, because most of the communities were not able to cope nor build back quickly because of the state that they were already in beforehand. Secondly, we also, another bitter lesson was that the state of the ecosystem and the environment, the degradation, significantly worsened the impact of the cyclone. So because of deforestation, because of poor watershed management, the impact of the floods and the mudslides were higher than could have been. So the good thing is those were lessons that were learned, and like I said, some of them bitter, but it's helped for Malawi to shift from this cycle of just focusing on disaster response to more focus on long-term resilience planning and building. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. I will move on to another question. This question came in from Marco Masimbazi. The question is, water can be a source of conflict and security, but what is an example of sanitation becoming a source of conflict at the national or international level? Concern and resource allocation for sanitation has been less and less, and possibly these two subsectors need to be addressed separately. I don't know who that is aimed at, but does somebody want to take that? I will have to start calling out names. Des.
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Help the panelists out a little bit. That's a really important question, actually. And I think it's something that we have to make a lot more clearer. So when you don't have safe sanitation in any environment, one of the disbeneficiaries of that directly is the water source itself. We start polluting our waters, we pollute our aquifers, and we pollute our freshwater systems. And the net result is that you have a lower water availability in that system. It leads to water scarcity, and it then follows the classical cycle that we talk about all of the time. So when we're talking about an investment in assets, they're all very, very closely related. The second thing associated with that is that even if we go on the quest of increasing our sanitation coverage with the current dominant technological platforms, which is waterborne sewage, we're going to run into very, very serious trouble. We simply do not have enough water to be able to manage that. So moving to non-sewage systems and low water systems and even waterless systems is exactly the future that Africa needs to grasp onto, both from the perspective of coverage as well as the security issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Des. Does anyone else want to come in on that?
If I may just try to add one, maybe in a few seconds.
Please go ahead. Yes, please.
I think the question of sanitation has got a direct link to question of state legitimacy, governance. And if the population feels the government is incompetent, is incapable of addressing the disease question, prevention question, and all those things, then as soon as state is legitimate in the eyes of the citizens, is a precursor to violence. That is one. And then other aspect is the part of contamination, the industrial waste contamination of the drinking water by the masses, by the population. And until the population reaches a point of saying, look, such and such industries are the one contaminating water with absolute impunity, and who is responsible? Just because the revenue is coming doesn't mean the state shouldn't protect its citizen. And we always talked about it here that just because revenue is high, the state can almost feed the citizen to lions just to attract more tourism, things like that. So if we should look into the aspect of contamination, and the purification process is too expensive, and it comes also treatment, a majority of the households can't afford even the basic purification processes and even just a mere treatment. And it comes back into, affects the children because of the sanitation crisis. Then households are affected. We are looking at the future, what future we're raising. Thought I should just add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, the last part of that question was that perhaps water and sanitation should be handled separately. But what I'm hearing from the answers from our expert speakers is that really they shouldn't be handled separately. They are one and the same with respect to conflict and the lack of resources that are going to sanitation. Let's move on to another question. We have a question from David Nyirenda. Sorry about that. Great Lakes regions of Africa have a lot of waters through the rivers and lakes. How can these countries be helped to harness their water potential? Again, it's not aimed at anybody. If somebody would like to take that, that would be great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bassam.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, I wanted to give an example from Tunisia. Thank you, David, for the question. The Great Lakes region actually show that having water resources is not enough. Means countries also need strong governance and infrastructure and long-term investment to harness that potential sustainability. Tunisia, for example, despite being one of the most, I'm from Tunisia, by the way, despite being one of the most water-scarce countries in Africa and in the world, it was at one point able to mobilize nearly 90% of its surface water. I don't remember which year, but it was through dams, transfer systems, strategic water management, etc. So this demonstrates that water security depends as much on management and planning as on natural availability.
Yeah, if I may, Jan.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Bassam, for this introduction. And I'm saying hi to you from Tunis. I'm visiting Tunis. So, yeah, to just add something in this, helping these countries to harness their water potential, it requires really an integrated and regional approach that must combine infrastructure, governance, sustainability, and economic transformation. And these lakes and rivers such as Lake Victoria, Tanganyika, Kivu, Nile Basin, or Congo, those countries need strong basin organizations for the better management of the water resources. And then for that, there is a need for shared data and information. So it can be managed in a framework such as protocol or consultation mechanism to manage the shared water resources. And then in this way, water cooperation can become a platform for peace building and regional integration. So all these are linked, and then also they may invest in infrastructure, and even sometimes there is irrigation that is not enough. So there is need for better governance of the shared water resources. So countries must collaborate, must communicate, cooperate to put in place a framework for the better management of the shared transboundary water resources. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've noticed that David has also snuck in a second question with his first question, but I will leave it and come back to that and let some other of the audience have a chance to ask. So we have a question from Issam Chiarag. Again, my apologies for the name. And it's an open question. And the question is, while many river basin organizations and water institutions across Africa possess strong technical mandates and strategically important projects, yet often face challenges in translating these into bankable and investment-ready opportunities capable of attracting public and private capital. How do you see the way forward to face this bottleneck in terms of concrete actions to take? Another river basin organization transboundary question. Eric, please go ahead.
Thanks, Diane. I think it's a very valid question, and it touches on financing. So I just wanted to share a few thoughts around that. From where I sit, the problem is actually not a shortage of water projects within the river basin organizations. Within the continent, and according to some latest research done, for instance, by institutions like World Resources Institute, has established through World Bank that there are almost over 400, bankable nature-based solutions project which are water-related, building on large-scale adaptation, resilience building to climate change, addressing issues around flooding, drought, and aspects around coastal erosion. So I think, in summary, what are their diagnostics? We need to, for instance, within the river basin organizations and other institutions, especially at the regional level, number one, to look at how do we embed, project preparation facilities within these RBOs. How do we have, for instance, well-capacitated development units that ensures that they can, cite the money, they can develop, bankable project pipelines, which can also target, blended finance facilities, but also other MDB opportunities, and including bilateral, funding opportunities. There's also an element of de-risking. A good number of, especially, water security projects are considered, especially by impact investors, capital markets as risky. So I think, for instance, you coming from African Development Bank, currently within WWF, and I just want to conclude because there are myriad of solutions around this, we are piloting the adaptation benefits mechanism. And that in its way, working with with the bank and other institutions, will help us develop and concretize the metrics, the methodological approach on how, for instance, quote unquote, to ensure that adaptation projects, resilience projects can be quantified and credits can be allocated that, for instance, impact investors, capital investors, private sector could potentially look into futuristically after 5 years, 10 years, what will be the benefits accruing out of these projects, and how can we therefore attract seed funding upstream that can go a long way in addressing, especially basin level impact water security projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Des, please go ahead.
Yeah, a really short intervention around this thing. That's a really critical question because most of our river basin organizations are organized primarily around governance and cooperative governance and protocols, etc. Very few of them, I only know one to be honest, actually have a balance sheet and an asset ownership. And so most just don't have an ability to go into the market. So even when you have really good plans around these things, you would have to rely on national entities to use their balance sheets in order to get the financing required for the projects, and then you have very limited success. Whereas where you see where there is that balance sheet transfer, success rates are pretty decent. And I mean, a more recent example would probably be the next phase of the Lesotho Highlands scheme. So I think in the way that we're talking about the integration over these 3 seminars around what strategic asset dimensions there are, a security dimension, a social dimension, political dimension, there also has to be that economic dimension to make it work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Bassem, I think I missed your hand. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Just one quick comment from my side. Thank you, Aysam, for this very pertinent question. Actually, the world is changing and accessing fund is becoming more and more difficult. And I see the way forward now is to strengthen, especially the project preparation capacities, feasibility studies, financial structuring, and especially the climate risk analysis that is becoming a trend now, measurable impact indicators. At the same time, build strong partnerships between governments, river basins, organizations, development banks, and especially the private sector. So more and more the investors are looking for scalable climate resilient projects now with strong governance and clear long-term sustainability, not the classic standalone water projects that we used to design 10 years ago. Thank you.
All very interesting and important points. Thank you, Bassem. Moving forward, this is an interesting question. How is the mining sector involved in this dialogue on water, not only in terms of social responsibility, but also in terms of its overall responsibility for water security? And that's from Patrice. And it's not directed at anyone in particular, so please go ahead. That's Sam.
Thank you. We have an example in Mali. That's why I raised my hand. Actually, in the Kainyoro area, we have an example where traditional gold mining is polluting water resources and with huge impact on not only on water, but also on the safety of the population living around. So this sector, the mining sector, I mean, should be part of the water dialogue not only through the CSR, the corporate social responsibility, but as a stakeholder in the water governance and the water security, especially. So mining activities, for example, in the Falémé, around the Falémé River in Mali, are affecting the river system, the ecosystem, the water quality, and also competition over the scarce resources. It's causing competition and conflicts, particularly in fragile water stressed regions. So this means that this sector has a responsibility to reduce the pollution, improve water efficiency and reuse, invest in watershed protection, and also support transparent and sustainable water management in collaboration with the governments and especially the communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Hamidou?
Yes, if I can maybe add just one word, it's a very good question because mining sector uses water, so it has to move beyond a simple corporate social responsibility approach and then become a full partner of groundwater or water resources governance. Because the mining sector, sometimes they have very interesting information. So this information is shared, can help better manage the water resources, better contribute to the knowledge. Then the mining has direct responsibility then for the sustainable water management through groundwater monitoring and sharing information data, then also preventing pollution. So it is very important then to be as a very good partner at basin level governance mechanism, I think, yeah. As hydrogeologists, sometimes we very rely on mining information that they collect to just fill some gaps we do not have especially sometimes from the private sector that we cannot get it from other sectors.
Thank you. Henry?
Thank you. Just a quick intervention. Also building on what Dr. Babasi just said, is the amount of water used in mining is not that great, but the impact of mining on water is exponentially larger. And I think governments have a role to play, especially when you're licensing mining activities, and also enforcement of the licensing regulations on the mining companies themselves, because that's where it sometimes fails. And the mines are in rural, remote places. Sometimes it's hard to get to, and the monitoring has to be done correctly, but the enforcement, when you monitor and you find something is wrong, has to be done as well. Thanks.
Thank you. What I'm hearing is that, and I'm totally in agreement, is that the water, all water use sectors have a responsibility for, with respect to water security, whether it be in quantity or in quality. And in particular for the mining sector, there's a responsibility and a great link between in terms of information, because the mining sectors do have the money and the importance in terms of getting information about groundwater. So they have an important role to play in that as well. Des, one last answer to.
Yes. Look, for those countries that have, African countries that have a legal regime around this, it's really explicit. It's explicit what the responsibilities are. It's also explicit that polluting a water source is a water use for which you have to pay. But even where there is policing capacity, for example, South Africa, this happens very little because folk have worked out really sophisticated ways of getting around it. You know, one of the the more amusing proposals has been that mining houses and other heavy industry should actually have their point of abstraction downstream from their point of outflow so they can inherit their own mess. But this needs to be a big part of the rollout of the implementation of the African Water Vision, because mining on the continent is only set to go in one direction, and that's increasing substantively, particularly in the domain of critical minerals. So if we don't get this right, we're going to have a very big problem going into the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you to our experts. That was a very interesting question. One last question before we wrap up the Q&A from Iyop Yishak. Again, I'm bad at pronouncing names. There's a significant gap in funding for peace initiatives, and I believe that investments in water and water security cannot be realized without strong social cohesion efforts. I have witnessed water facilities developed by UN agencies and NGOs being damaged due to conflicts. What suggestions do you have for UN agencies and other stakeholders regarding funding peace initiatives through governments and NGOs? Again, not directed at anyone in particular.
If I may, since everybody is thinking deeper, it's a very important point. There's very visible lack of financial support towards peace building processes in many aspects. And every situation is quite reactionary. People come in only when disaster is already happening. When people are fighting, that's when we have peace building responses and all those things. But coming into programming that we have, we were also wondering, say, what does peace building look like? If really, we have always wondered if peacekeeping or peace missions was the reason for peace, Congo would have been the most peaceful country on earth. But it is what it is today. And then when we also wondered if we are promoting peace, what is Africa in terms of from the historical point of view, as a continent in need of reconstruction, is a continent in need of rebuilding, very difficult history that we have continued to pass on from one generation to another generation. And that's why we were wondering, we said, what would a new approach look like for peace? Then we try to assume that a better approach to lasting peace in Africa should be rooted into getting deeper into the core of the issues, and use that, steps down to the history of the situation, the challenges in the community, to tackle the core issues, and then use that as a staircase to come up to the surface of the reality. And when we ask ourselves, as Africans, where the world is quite okay with oil and energy. They have so much money, but as a continent, we are not so much in that yet. The world is quite advanced in technology. There's a lot of resources but we are not also quite yet there. But the third aspect, which is very important, that can keep the continent at peace, is food sector, food production, and we are there. So if we are to tackle the economic despair, address the nitty-gritties that keeps people, relapsing into the historical difficulties, they can't go around, they're caught up in the merry-go-round of historical indifferences. I think this would be the best opportunity. That's when we're saying that let us mobilize the young people, engage them, and let them understand that who really feeds the world, who rule the world. Is it the engineers? Is it the politicians? Is it the soldiers? Is it the pilots? No, the world rulers are food producers. And if they fund food, because everyone is working to eat, whether they are pilots, the engineers, or wherever they are all working to it. So that's why we need to see. Let us mobilize the right potential of the young people, young Africans, and utilize the opportunities available and engage them into say, look, the lasting peace is rooted in your economic independence. And this is where we are going to, unless they own something. If they are not able to, if they got nothing else to lose, they will not fear to step up in the street and destroy. So our approach has been empower the young people, create investment spirit in the children at early age so that they can hone and be part of the greater development. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Sam, last comment, and then we have to move on. Thank you.
Yeah, very quickly. I want to add just very short comment that we should design this water investment as a peace-building investment from the beginning, including the community dialogue, the inclusive governance, conflict-sensitive programming, local ownership, and also donors and governments should increase their flexibility in financing this kind of nexus approach, and fund water, climate resilience, and social cohesion together, instead of funding infrastructure in isolation. And the cross-border project, for example, that we had between Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, is a good example, because we spent almost 1 year and a half engaging with local authorities, beneficiaries, government at national level and decentralized levels, before even starting and implementing the project, which I think it's a good start for a peace building investment. Thank you.
Thank you to all the expert panelists, and a special thank you to the audience for the very interesting and pertinent questions that you have asked to feed this conversation. In just 1 brief minute each, I would like to ask each panelist to give us one action point as a concluding remark for this session. Let's see. Henry, Dr. Roman, you first.
Thank you. Quickly, so for me, it's recognizing water as a foundation for economic transformation, food security, and climate resilience, integrating it into national development and investment planning. So the action would be embedding water security into macroeconomic strategies, the national budgets, and regional cooperation frameworks. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Babasi.
Yeah, from my side is I insist in cooperation, investment for water cooperation, because investment is not only for the water security, but also allows peace building, resilient, and shared prosperity for future generations. So the investment on groundwater is really very important for regional cooperation.
Thank you. Let's move to Betty.
Thank you very much. For me, I think just to emphasize the point that water is a strategic economic asset at the center of Africa's development agenda. And when we strengthen water governance and management, we simultaneously strengthen food security, energy security, public health, industrialization, and climate resilience. And it is important that we move from reactive disaster response to proactive climate resilience investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eric?
Thank you, Madam Diane. I think for me, my call to action is a very bold statement, which again has been alluded to by a number of speakers, and I think I'm also seeing comments and questions from the participants. But very briefly, I want to leave this webinar with this quote, that water is not a sector issue. It is the foundation of food dignity, environmental health, and economic resilience for Africa. And therefore, we cannot afford to keep managing it in pieces. I think for me that is really the fundamental issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bassam.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. My call is very clear. Let us stop treating water as a sector and start treating it as the foundation of peace. In the Sahel, every borehole that works is a conflict preventer. Every basin we manage together is a border we strengthen, and every child we save with safe water is a future we secure. So in the African Water Vision 2063, it gives us actually the ambition. Now we owe the discipline, the financing, and the courage to implement and to deliver.
Thank you. Last but not least, Victor.
Oh, thank you so much. And I aware of the current situation where poverty, conflict, and climate-related displacement is racking up Africa. I think the biggest issue we need to understand is the post-conflict recovery is incomplete until poverty and trauma are addressed. And without this, communities always remain fertile ground for instability. And I think key to this is water. We need to do everything possible to make sure we support this young generation of children and youth who has got the greatest potential and yet at risk for the future of conflict.
Thank you so much to our expert panel and the very interesting conversation that we have had. So this brings the panel discussion to a close. Once again, allow me to express appreciation for the insights and the expertise that have been with us today. Now, we would like to introduce, and please sit back and listen to the closing remarks, which will be delivered via video message by His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Idris, the permanent observer of the African Union to the United Nations. Let's roll the video, please.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. As we conclude this important discussion under sub-theme 3 on water and sanitation for peace, energy and food security, allow me to express sincere appreciation to the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, our distinguished partners, panelists, and all participants for the rich and forward-looking exchanges held today. Today's dialogue has reaffirmed a fundamental reality. Water and sanitation are not merely development concerns, they are strategic pillars for Africa's peace, resilience, energy transition, food systems, public health, and long-term prosperity. Across our continent, the growing pressures of climate change, demographic expansion, environmental degradation, rising demand for natural resources are intensifying vulnerabilities and exposing the urgent need for integrated and cooperative responses. At the same time, our discussion have clearly demonstrated that water can and must become a catalyst for cooperation rather than conflict, a driver of regional integration rather than fragmentation, and a foundation for inclusive and sustainable development. The adoption of the Africa Water Vision 2063 by the African Union Assembly earlier this year represents a historic milestone in this regard. It reflects a transformative continental vision that positions water and sanitation not only as basic services, but as strategic economic assets, instruments of peace building, and engines of structural transformation across Africa. As highlighted throughout today's discussion, Africa's future requires moving beyond fragmented and sectoral approaches. The water, energy, food ecosystem nexus approach provides a compelling framework to advance integrated solutions capable of simultaneously strengthening food security, expanding sustainable energy access, protecting ecosystems, and enhancing climate resilience. Equally important is the need to strengthen transboundary water cooperation with the vast majority of Africa's surface waters crossing national borders. Cooperation is no longer optional. It is essential for regional stability, shared prosperity, and collective resilience. Basin-level cooperation, preventive diplomacy, and effective water governance mechanisms must therefore remain at the center of our continental efforts. As we also heard strong calls today for the integration of water security considerations into Africa's broader peace and security architecture. Water insecurity increasingly acts as a threat multiplier, exacerbating fragility, displacement, and socioeconomic instability in vulnerable regions. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the human dimension of this agenda. Millions across Africa, particularly women, children, youth, and vulnerable communities, continue to face severe deficits in access to safely managed water and sanitation services. Excellencies, the discussions held today have reinforced the importance of political leadership, regional solidarity, innovation, and partnerships in advancing Africa's water agenda. Africa possesses immense water resources, immense human potential, and immense capacity for innovation. The challenge before us is therefore not simply one of scarcity, but one of governance, investment, cooperation, and collective action. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let us therefore move forward with renewed determination to translate the ambitions of the African Water Vision 2063 into concrete action on the ground, action that advances peace, strengthens resilience, promotes sustainable development, and secures a more prosperous future for all Africans. I thank you very much. How long did this seem?
Thank you. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all once again for joining us today, and we hope to see you again at tomorrow's youth stage, which will take place at the same time and will also address the issues of water and sanitation for peace, energy, and food security. As a reminder, please take note that the ADS 2026 will culminate in the high-level policy dialogue to be held in person at the UN headquarters in New York on Friday, the 29th of May from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. I thank you all once again. I wish you an incredible day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye, Diana.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Bye. Bye, everybody.